Hey everybody. So after I sent out an email this morning, gender versus sex, the origins, right? Um I got some feedback, and a couple of the comments or requests were for me to talk, actually to write more about Magnus Hirschfeld, but I decided just to do a video. So Magnus Hirschfeld, aka, actually, let me share, let me see if I can pull up the email itself. The original email that I sent. I can read that real quick. If I can find it. Here we go. All right. All right. I think that'll be good. Let's see if I can share this screen real quick. My apologies, not being prepared. Gender versus sex, the origins. So language has gender, right? A grammatical system, while humans have sex, a biological reality. Grammatical gender is a classification system. Let me make sure I am sharing this. All right, there we go. All right. So language has gender. That's a grammatical system, while humans have sex. That's a biological reality, right? So grammatical gender is a classification system that many languages use to group nouns into different categories, right? Well, male, female, masculine, feminine. There's also another category, like obsolete or neuter or something. But in Spanish, for example, if I was to say amiga, which means friend, that would be feminine, used for females. If I say amigo for friend, that's masculine and it's used for males. German, Italian, French, Russian, Polish, and other languages that are considered quote unquote romance languages are the ones that use grammatical gender. Now, some languages like English, Chinese, Turkish, and Japanese have almost no grammatical gender. English only keeps it in a few pronouns like he, she, him, her for biological sex. At least that's what it's always been referring to. So even though grammatical gender has been labeled a thing of the past, it still matters because these romance languages still use the correct word for the correct sex. So here's a fact. Humans are sexually dimorphic, meaning that there are two primary reproductive roles. Males produce small gametes, or sperm. They have XY chromosomes. They have higher testosterone and certain secondary sexual characteristics, while females produce large gametes, ovas or ovaries. They have XX chromosomes. They have higher estrogen levels and or progesterone, and different secondary characteristics. The secondary characteristics really are just like, girls grow breasts, boys grow hair on their face, that kind of stuff. One thing I find amazing is that all of us, every single one of us, has over 6,500 chromosome markers that make us distinctly male or distinctly female. So there can never, ever be any confusion whether or not a male can have a girl brain, because that is literally impossible. Now, there are rare intersex conditions. Pay attention. 0.018% to 1.7% of births have this rare intersex condition, which is basically a developmental disorder of sexual development. It's not an additional sex. Okay, there is no, it's not, does not create a third category, even though that's what a lot of people think. And according to medical doctors, intersex is a birth defect. All right, sex is not assigned at birth, it is observed at birth. And in more than 99.98% of cases, simply by observing the genitalia. Sex is binary. And contrary to elusive propaganda and agendas, there is no third gamut. Sex is a biological and very material reality that is directly tied to reproduction. So, modern gender ideology, especially since the 1950s to the 1970s, with pedophile Dr. John Money and pedo apologist Judith Butler, has tried to mingle or replace the word sex with gender. Originally, till somewhere during the mid 20th century, gender was almost exclusively a grammatical term. Somewhere in the 1950s, psychologists started using gender to talk about social roles or social constructs and psychological roles to distinguish them from biology. A very dangerous experiment that has literally opened up Pandora's box. So by 1990 through the early 2000s, activist and academic usage shifted gender to mean an internal identity or social construct, and sometimes claimed that it's entirely detached from sex, or even, believe it or not, that it replaces the concept of sex. Many of these activists and academics are also push the false ideology that there is no such thing as biological sex, no such thing as binary. This is why people now say things like sex is a spectrum, or gender is between your ears, sex is between your legs, or that they are gender fluid or non binary, or any of the other non existent genders out there. Now, these very misled individuals are using gender in this new ideological sense, not the original linguistic one. Dr. John Money believed pedophilia was a harmless sexual orientation. You heard me right. Dr. John Money believed that pedophilia was a harmless sexual orientation that, quote unquote, when practiced properly, led to the child suffering no harm. Now, that, of course, is false. The reality that no child can consent ever completely derails this diabolical experiment and these allegations. Children cannot consent ever. While Dr. John Money, pederast and sexologist, coined the term gender to be used as a social construct or a psychological one, he did not create the concept of gender. The concept of gender goes back before Harry Benjamin to Magnus Hirschfeld, who was a very sick, sadistic German physician, sexologist, and LGBT advocate, believe it or not, whose German citizenship was actually revoked in 1933 by the German government. So Hirschfeld was a pedophile. He was a pedo apologist. He was demented. He was a very outspoken promoter of all things perverted and related to fetishes. It is said that Hirschfeld and Dr. Alfred Kinsey, the mad scientist pedophile, were very well acquainted. Gender identity is propaganda, and it has become a focal point of social discourse along with the legal policy and procedure. While it remains something that was invented to cause chaos, division, and confusion. So, after speaking to the high schoolers the other day, I was shocked at how many believe the gender is a social construct lies. So, when a movement finds its origins in men like Magnus Hirschfeld, Alfred Kinsey, Harry Benjamin, and John Money, that movement must be exposed. It must be stopped, outlawed, and ended by any means necessary. So it is time for people to stand up, speak out, push back against the LGBTQ plus cult and others break away from this type of groupthink as this dark cloud of perversion envelops the youth, the vulnerable, and the mentally ill. And then, so I ended the email, and I tagged a video that Vicky Joy Anderson and I did with Dr. Judith Reisman. And so then I got a few messages saying, I want to know more about this Magnus Hirschfeld guy. But before I talk about that, I'm just going to really quick throw this out there, because when I say children cannot consent, I mean it. And I want people to completely understand that, because it's so important. I mean, so very important.
Listen, I wasn't held down and forced to do anything. I actually associated my molestation with love, which is why at 8 years old, I was cutting school and I was going and hanging out in a public bathroom on the boardwalk in Atlantic City, waiting for any pervert to come along. I would sit at bus stops and I would just sit there and wait. And he would always show up. Young or old, it didn't matter. But I was never held down and forced to do anything. And although there were times where I really believe that I tried to manipulate or instigate this situation as a child, it's still molestation. There's some things that are never meant, ever. Never ever meant for a child to endure. And I gotta tell you, sex is one of them. When an adult engages with a child, it's a violation.
Children cannot consent ever. Ever. So Magnus Hirschfeld, right? He was also known as, what they called him was the Einstein of sex. And he was one sick, sadistic sexologist and advocate for all things perverted, especially the LGBT cult. He also ran an institute for sexual science, and this was a very dark and deviant place, right? It was for fetishists, mentally deranged, sexually sadistic, and all things lewd and lascivious. There was a museum. He had a museum of sexual torture devices, as well as groups brought in to create new and exciting torture devices. A young male, I think he was over 30 years younger than Hirschfeld, was identified as the woman of the house. He was Hirschfeld's sex slave, and he was also the guinea pig for Hirschfeld's sick and twisted mind and agenda. So this young male later committed suicide. It goes so deep, it goes so dark, and I think that what we don't recognize is just how perverted and how dark this is. It comes from the pit of hell. Hirschfeld was the one that first started doing experimental sexual reassignment surgeries, and this was back in like 1920s. His studies, or his quote unquote research, was what has now become the norm in gender affirming care, like double mastectomies, castration, penectomies, etc., things of that nature. Hirschfeld was also the first to attempt at giving a male a first, not a first, a false vagina. So the man, the patient, later died about a year later after suffering for the entire year from the moment of his surgery until the moment he died. That man suffered horrifically, tremendously, and his body completely rejected that experiment that he had been subjected to. So Dr. Harry Benjamin of the United States, another sick, perverted pedo apologist, heard of Hirschfeld over in Berlin and brought him to the United States to do what? None other than to teach other doctors and scientists these practices. So please note that Harry Benjamin succumbed to his own perversions after being indoctrinated by mad scientist pedophile Alfred Kinsey. And you can see how diabolical and deviant all of this is when you really look at the big picture. Harry Benjamin wanted these experimental surgeries to be more accessible in the United States because he wanted to further this sexually and mentally deranged agenda. Harry Benjamin also started an organization later that became, imagine that, WPATH, the World Professional Association for Transgender Health. So WPATH, quote unquote, standards and their research happen to be the same organization that many of these gender affirming care sanctuary states use when pushing the transqueer agenda. So all of these gender affirming care pushers use WPATH standards and research as their guidelines, which was created by Dr. Harry Benjamin after he brought Magnus Hirschfeld over from Berlin to teach them all of these sick, sadistic, sexual fetishes and ideologies. So one of the original researchers for the organization that later became WPATH was Dr. John Money. So you can see how all of these perverted and very demented people have come together to inflict one of the most dangerous experiments ever on our culture and our society, and especially the children. So Magnus Hirschfeld came, right? And he taught, quote unquote, right? These quote unquote researchers, all of his methods and ideology. And it doesn't get any more evil than this. Because after Hirschfeld left America, the agenda really took off. Not just in the medical and the psychological world, but the political one as well. Pedophiles and pedo apologists now had a place to invest their time and their money to further their own perversions and deviant behaviors. Now, people, listen. As a former trans prostitute, I can promise you that my clientele were judges, politicians. They were CEOs and founders of very, very wealthy businesses and companies and organizations. These were the men in power. These were the men who were rushing to engage in sexual activity with transgenders or transsexuals. Back in the day, they were called transsexuals. And I can assure you that when these men, doctors, lawyers, judges, politicians, hello, when they came into that motel room or into whatever, and they removed their male clothing. They had on female undergarments. And some of them were even wearing their wives or their daughters' undergarments. So this is how sick and perverted these men are, right? So they're not only into pedophilia and bestiality and all of these other fetishes and sadomasochism and bondage and discipline, but they're demented. So even just Dr. John Money alone, he identified as a polyamorous, right? One who engages in sexual romantic relations with more than one person. A polyamorous bisexual nudist. And he also stated that pornography can be beneficial to marriages. You heard me right. He endorsed pedophilia and his belief that many wives, and I'm quoting him here, he said that many wives believe that it is beneficial for their husband to have incestuous relations with their children, because it would give the wife relief from having to satisfy her husband's sexual appetite and help him, the husband, get closer to his children. Does it get any more demented? Absolutely. Just look around you, look at society, look at culture. Dr. John Money was not a scientist, but his research, quote unquote research, is often used as if he was. He was just a psychologist that happened to be infatuated with everything that had anything to do with genitalia. He promoted and he pushed the whole entire gender as a construct lie. And he taught that gender identity came from where? From nurture and not from nature. So if you have never heard of the John Joan case about Bruce Reimer, then I suggest you Google it and learn a little bit about how Dr. John Money destroyed his own concept along with the minds, bodies, and souls of Bruce Reimer and his twin brother, Brian. Both of these boys that were involved in this horrific experiment, and both of them committed suicide in the end. Even their mother in the end turned to drugs and alcohol after it all. It's a very sad, very tragic story. It's called the John Joan case. It's about Bruce and Brian Reimer, Reimer. So if whenever you get time, Google it. Dr. John Money, 1955 is when he actually coined the term gender roles. And I just can't stop thinking about these when I was speaking to the high schoolers the other day and how they referred to gender as a social construct, gender roles, how it's all supposed to be in your head, right? And that's where today's dark, perverted gender ideology stems from. So, and I know I went further than just explaining who or what Magnus Hirschfeld was, but we must grasp the fact that gender identity is propaganda, and it has become a focal point of social discourse along with legal policy and procedure, while it remains something that was invented to cause chaos, division, and confusion. So after speaking to those high schoolers the other day, I was so shocked at just how many of them believe that gender is a social construct, or how many of them refer to other genders or sexual orientations. Beloved folks, this is probably, not even probably, this is one of the most horrific and barbaric experiments ever to be conducted. And the worst part is that it's being conducted on children, on the vulnerable, and on the weak. And when a movement finds its origins in men like Magnus Hirschfeld, Alfred Kinsey, Dr. John Money, Harry Benjamin, Harvey Milk, Alfred Kinsey, did I say that? When any movement finds themselves being built upon a foundation of those types of perverted men, then just like I said in the email, it's time to expose it, to stop it, to outlaw, and to end it. End that cult by any means necessary. It's time for all of us stand up, speak out, push back against this cult, help others break away from this type of groupthink, because this dark cloud of perversion is going to continue to envelop the youth. It's going to continue to envelop the vulnerable, and it's going to continue to envelop the mentally ill. So not only would this help hundreds of thousands of misled, of bamboozled and indoctrinated individuals find freedom from this bondage of ignorance and perversion, not to mention the lives that it would save, right? From being sterilized, saving children from being butchered and mutilated, used as guinea pigs in this horrific experiment. But it would also weaken the socialists, Marxists, and Islamists that continue to use these individuals as their shields and martyrs. Okay? And please pay attention to what I'm saying now, because wrong sex hormones, or HRT, hormone reparative therapy, and puberty blockers are psychotropic drugs that destroy, alter, and halt brain activity. They halt brain structure, the function and development of the brain, causing emotionally invested and mentally unstable super soldiers that are being exploited and used to further the entirety of pedophilia, Islamist takeovers, the socialist, Marxist agendas, and all things evil that have folks believing the lies of the diabolical political agenda that is being forced upon this nation and the world, especially these children. So I just say, please take heed. Consider all of these facts. Even if you're not sure, or maybe you don't even believe a word of what I said, please just think. Please just think that this just might have a sliver of truth to it. Because later on down the road, you may be very shocked at exactly how it all plays out. So if you do not see, that the leftists, the socialists, the Marxists, the Islamists, if you do not see that these groups are promoting and encouraging and celebrating and pushing the transqueer agenda, then you're blind. But what you have to do is sit back and say, why are they doing this? One, Islamists hate those people, hate them. They want to off with their heads. So why are they doing it? Because of the drugs, the poisons that are being given to these people. They create martyrs. These people are so depressed, so distraught, right? And before I go, I'm going to see if I can find real quick. Here it is. Let's see if I can share this with you before I bounce out of here. There we go. This is the same woman. All 5 of those pictures are the same woman. Okay. Puberty blockers and wrong sex hormones are psychotropic poisons. Am I sharing the picture? I'm not. It figures. All right. Once again, this is the same woman. The same woman. All five. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Those are 5 stages. 5 stages. Puberty blockers, wrong sex hormones are psychotropic poisons. They alter your mood, your thoughts, your feelings, and literally alter brain structure and halt brain development, as well as they will alter your central nervous system. This photo is of the same woman in different stages of transitioning. She also ended up randomly stabbing a stranger. HRT destroys. Hormone reparative therapy destroys. Wrong sex hormones destroy. Puberty blockers destroy. These are psychotropic poisons. From psychotropic to psychopathic. That's what we're up against. Y'all have a blessed day. Peace.